Hello, everyone. Welcome to our final formal chapter meetup for the year. It's been quite a year, eh? But before I go any further, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Wurundjeri and the Bunwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, traditional custodians of the land on which our chapter is streaming from today, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and coming. I extend that respect and acknowledgement to the Maori peoples that Toni, one of our presenters, is presenting from today, and to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people watching here today. Well, this would be our final chapter meetup for 2020. We are expecting to be back in 2021, but it's been a heck of a year. So many things has happened, and we survived. This is a time for celebrations, so let's celebrate. And with that, we couldn't have done this without the many amazing people who have helped us along the way and provided the support and supported this chapter. So a very brief thank you. Thank you to Aaron, my co-lead, Andrew, Toni, Lydia, Lucas, Josh, Approver, Ian, Eleanor, and all of you, our wonderful community. Thank you. As we go through this period between now and February, we may have a few more social events and other informal meetups that would happen between now and then. We'll inform you of this via Discord. So if you're there, awesome. Keep an eye out, and we'll announce them as they come. This would be mostly impromptu, and it's just, to enjoy ourselves. Just one bit of just something we need your help with. As we wrap up this year and as we look forward to the next, we would like to hear from you. We'd like to hear from you. What can we do better? What have we done? What can we do better, and what we have done well? And we'd like you to tell us what you'd like to see more from us in the coming year. So we have a little short survey that we have. If you could, please take a moment and respond to that survey so that we could focus our efforts in the coming year. And, well, as this is also the season of giving, just want to reach out. We are a non-for-profit organization, and we need your support. So if you have the ability, please donate to the foundation, OWASP.org/donate, or sign up for a membership and join us as a member. Link below here. In any case, speaking of sponsorships and members and donations, AppSec Day 2021, sponsorships, partnerships, if you are interested in any of that, or your company might be interested in any of that, please email us at, what's that email? Yeah, that email, melbourne-chapter@owasp.org, and let's have a chat about that. Okay, enough of those announcements and updates. Just one more thing I'd like to point out. We have a jobs channel in the Discord. So if you are looking for work or your company that you're working at is hiring, please go ahead and post that, and hopefully we can help somebody find a new job. Well, it is the new year after all, and a whole bunch of people are looking for new work. So as we welcome our next speaker, Toni from New Zealand. I'd like to greet her and all of you in traditional Maori. Tēnā koto, tēnā koto, tēnā koto katoa. Greetings to you all. Escaping the US to Middle Earth, Toni is a security consultant, software engineer, conference organizer, and diversity and inclusion advocate, an all-round legend with a big heart. She's an avid snowboarder and mountain biker living in her human and fur family in Korowai Mountains. You can find her running the Christchurch Hacker Conference, attending Christchurch ISIG or Canterbury Tech Meetups, or chatting with the Hacker Book Club group. And now I'd like to invite Toni to take the stage. And yeah, thank you for coming. And take it away, Toni.
Awesome. Thank you, Danielle, for having me. Kia ora tātou, kokoro ai te manga, koko ai te awa, no tauera ohau, ko James toko whānau, ko Toni toko ingoa, tēnā koto, tēnā tātou katoa. So, hello, my name is Toni, and for those of you that don't know, I just introduced myself with a traditional Maori greeting from the indigenous culture of New Zealand, which is where I've lived for the past 17 years now. So I call myself a recovering American because my accent hasn't changed whatsoever. I just have some Kiwi idioms that I've picked up along the way. But I'm super excited to be here and talk to you all about growing your own security champion, because it's something that I am extremely passionate about. It's something. It was my entry into security was as a software engineer. I got involved with the security community and became my own security champion. So this is from my perspective and some things I've observed along the way. But first, I want to talk to you about one of my new passions. So I don't know how many people in lockdown have picked up a new hobby, but I certainly did. And my hobby was gardening. And I know you're like, wait, what does gardening have to do with growing your own security champions? But I've learned a few tips and tricks along the way that I would really love to share with you. So please join me in my gardening adventure first. I swear I'll get to the other part in a little bit. So at the beginning of lockdown, we have this supermarket, and they do this wonderful little thing. You know, you buy so many groceries and you get, you know, toys or something useless. Well, New World here in New Zealand decided to have these my little gardens. And so when you go and buy groceries at New World, after a certain amount of money, they would give you a bunch of these My Little Gardens. And they're great. They're little cherry tomatoes. They're broccoli, they're all kinds of things. But I'm rubbish at gardening. I'm absolutely rubbish. My idea of gardening is just throwing seeds in the soil and walking away and letting Mother Nature take its course. But this little kit comes with a little pot, a little compostable pot. It comes with this ingenious little disc of soil where it's really fun because you add water to it and it expands, and then you have this mushy bit of soil and a lovely little seed packet. And the seed packet has about 8 seeds in it, so you get a chance of getting at least one seed growing on you. But I decided to, get better at gardening. Many of us tried new things over lockdown. Some retried old things, or really we just did anything to take our mind off what was actually happening in the world. And again, I am not a great gardener, so this was a journey and an adventure for me. In fact, one of my friends all through high school, she used to get me a cactus every birthday. So like one of those tiny little cactuses you put on the shelf. And she would get a cactus for me every single birthday because she knew by my next birthday, the cactus would be dead and she could just get me a new one. So I, again, am horrible at gardening, but I wanted to improve. And I had some time on my hands. And actually, in security, not a lot of us had time on our hands, but we just wanted distractions from everything else. So it was a good way to procrastinate from what we were actually supposed to be doing. So even though I'm no master gardener, I do have a few tips and tricks that I've learned along the way that I'd love to share with you that could actually help in other aspects of your life. So tip number one, starting right away, you have to want it. If you don't want it, you will never get there. Plain and simple. It has to be on your priority list. It doesn't have to be the top thing on your list, but it has to be somewhere in there. Do you want to be a better gardener? Do you want to grow better plants? Well, the answer has to be yes, and you have to stick to it. So what makes a good garden? Probably not your cat. Cats are notorious for not being so nice in the garden, but like healthy plants, right? And, so healthy plants is beautiful, and they have these wellness indicators. You can tell the healthy plant right away because it has bright colored petals if it's a flower, or has blooming flowers, beautiful green lush leaves, and a really strong stem, stands up straight. And then you can tell when you have a really unhealthy plant. When it all goes bad, you can see it's dull and wilted, and brown leaves and droopy stem and typically dry soil. So you have this visual of what is actually happening with the plants, whether you have healthy or not. So tip number two, pay attention. Pay attention to these wellness indicators of your plants. Learn what those what a healthy plant looks like and what those wellness indicators are. And learn what the early indicators are of sickness so that you can do something about it. Now, again, if you're anything like me, I highly recommend a plant called the peace lily. I actually have two in my house. So I have one plant right here, which is quite heavy. And, it's not the healthiest plant in the house. Actually, it probably is the healthiest plant in the house. But it does have some lilies on it. It's actually not really a lily. It just looks like one. So that's why it's called the peace lily. But the excellent thing about the peace lily is it's extremely resilient. And when you kind of forget to water it 4 weeks at a time, like I do, it gets really sad with droopy leaves. I did water this plant recently, but it still has some droopy leaves. And then you put a cup of water in it, and poof, it comes back to life. So it's fantastic. But don't get a cactus because they actually have a really tiny window from going, super happy and healthy to dead. So I don't recommend cactus, at least not if you're as bad as me, as I learned, every year on my birthday. So sure, there's an entire realm of botany and biochemistry that goes into plant growth. And, we're going to keep it simple, explain it to me like I was 5. And this is literally a worksheet from a kindergarten or primary school that I was looking at and was like, perfect, this is exactly what I need to talk about. So plants need soil, water, air, and light, right? Keeping it simple, let's keep those 4 basic needs. So let's talk about soil. They don't just need any soil. You can just throw seeds in the ground and hope something pops up. That would be fantastic. And it works sometimes. It's great. But, if you're trying to grow these beautiful roses, you need to have a very specific soil content. Of course, as we all know, dandelions, weeds, they can grow out of a crack in the concrete, which is fine if you only have concrete to work with. You're going to grow weeds, no problem. There's a bit of color in your life, it's fine. But luckily, you have the power over the type of soil you have to work with, right? We just pop down to the garden center. The type of soil you have really dictates the type of garden you can grow. So it's your opportunity, and it's up to you to make it the best soil possible. Now, many of us do not have a bunch of land to work with. And many more of us actually don't want all the work that comes with that outdoor garden. So we have potted plants filled with potting mix straight from the garden center. I will warn you, it does get addictive. And moving on to the next thing that plants need, the water. Now, I find water, obviously, the hardest thing about planting and about growing your own plants. With the soil, it's great. You know, you can go, you can purchase a nice, good soil mix. You can add compost to it. But when it comes to water, every single plant is different. Do you water it daily or weekly, or do you mist it with a spray bottle? Like, I don't know. So unfortunately, it takes a lot of research really to understand water. So tip number 4, there's no way around it. If you don't take the time to research your plants and find out the best way to water it, you're never going to know if it's too little or too much until it's too late. The amount of water you need really depends on the plant. So get to know your plant well enough just to know how much water it needs. Now, there are some tricks. I have learned these along the way because, again, I'm notoriously bad at watering any of my plants. So you can use a little funnel and fill it up with water, and the soil takes in as much as it wants. You can use a wine bottle, plenty of leftover wine bottles in my house. So you can prop that up and put that in the soil. Or a really ingenious one that I love is having a bunch of water containers with yarn or strings going into the soil, and then it just kind of pulls the water that it needs when it needs it. Unfortunately, you do have a bunch of water containers sitting around the house, but it's good if you have to go away. So just a few tricks there to help you water. And next, we're going to talk about air, right? Air is pretty insubstantial. It's like everything around us, all of the air. But one thing that's amazing about plants is they give back, right? So plants, trees, they feed off all the bad things in the air, all the carbon dioxides and toxins, and then they give us back oxygen, you know, something that we absolutely desperately need. So growing plants isn't all about sacrificing your time and effort in the plant. It comes with great reward, especially if you're growing edible plants or vegetables, right? You're going to get something out of it. And so tip number 5, and we often forget why we have all these plants around us, which is crazy considering all they provide for us. But just because you can't see what you're getting doesn't mean there are no rewards. So think about what you're actually getting from the plants around you. Maybe it's joy, maybe it's happiness, maybe it's a bit of color in your office as you're working from home. What are you getting out of your plants? But they're definitely giving us oxygen, which is fantastic. And here's a few plants, which peace lily, the English ivy, Gerber or Gerber daisies. I don't know how to pronounce that here. The Boston fern. I'm from the Northeast, so a lot of Boston ferns where I grew up. But they are notorious for cleaning the air, and they're excellent houseplants to have around. And actually, back in the day, I lived near Christchurch, New Zealand. And back in the day, the air quality was really, really bad here in the wintertime because everyone heated their house with fires, with wood fires. And so the wood smoke would go up. And in the wintertime, you would have this cloud sitting down over the city, and it would trap all of this wood smoke in the atmosphere close to homes. And a lot of my friends growing up in Christchurch can remember schools sending home peace lilies with them to help them clean the air in the house, which is absolutely random, but a genius idea. The next one I'd like to talk about is light. It's the final one we're going to talk about specifically for basic needs. And obviously plants use energy from the sun. It's called photosynthesis. We all learned about this in primary school, grade school, but feel free to Google it if you need a refresher. If a plant doesn't get enough light from the sun, the photosynthetic process, big word, slows down. And even if it has, sufficient, carbon dioxide and water and the soil is rich, it's going to stunt the growth of your plant and possibly kill it. So increasing the light intensity will boost the speed of photosynthesis and therefore its growth, which is fantastic, right? So tip number 6. Not every plant needs a lot of light, but shine as much light on your plant as they can handle. Not all plants like a lot of light, but they all deserve it. Again, with the peace lily, it's an excellent plant because it only likes a little bit of indirect light. So it's fine. You can leave it in the corner of the room as long as there's a window somewhere in the room. And it just sits back there in its happy little place. And be sure to provide as much sunshine as possible for your plants so that they can enjoy the sunshine and you can too. So there are some additional factors that help plants to survive, but they're not absolutely crucial to survival. Some studies have shown that plants exposed to classical music have seeds that sprout faster. They have faster time to flower. They have increased number of leaves and an increased number of flowers, which is cool, right? Friends, so companion planting has the added benefits of pest and disease control and increased soil nutrition and bee attraction. And of course, shelter is a bit self-explanatory, but garden sheds absolutely help moderate the weather, the temperature, but they're very easy to get hot. They dry out, and they're really susceptible to hail in New Zealand, unfortunately. So definitely be aware of that if you have some outdoor plants. And finally, love. We all need love. Plants need attention. Unfortunately, I have a lot of things in my life right now. My plants get the least amount of attention, but it still gets some attention from me because they're still alive, which is fantastic. So yeah, some need far more attention than most, but the healthiest ones are the ones that have the most love and care taken for them. So finally, this concludes my little gardening adventure. Thank you for coming along with me. This is everything I learned about gardening during lockdown, along with, a handy little graphic here on some indoor plants that you can use to spruce up your home office or co-working space. Because I know if you're anything like me, you want to put a few more things on the wall if you're lucky enough to have an office, or put a little greenery in the background. And if you are lucky enough to be in a co-working space, the nicest, most comfortable environments I've been in have a lot of plants, and it's excellent. But as I was going through this whole gardening process, I couldn't help but relate it back to growing security champions. Again, something that I'm really passionate about. How do you grow yourself as a security champion, and how do you grow others as a security champion? And really, it's a lot like plants. Drink water, get sunlight, your houseplant with complicated emotions. But I don't know if you've been taking notes up to this point. I doubt it. That's fine. I'm not offended. But I'd certainly encourage you to grab a piece of paper, because I'm going to ask you a few questions to start thinking about these things. Spoiler alert, I don't have all the answers for you. I'm sorry, but I will guide you in the right direction. So here goes. Starting with tip number 1, security champions. You have to want it. Okay, sound familiar? If you don't want it, you'll never get there. Plain and simple. It has to be on your priority list. So this applies both to individuals. You have to have it on your own priority list, but it also applies to leaders and team leads and managers. If you want to grow security champions with your team, you have to make this an obvious priority. You have to write it down. You have to make it visible, and you have to, you have to talk about it. You have to communicate. You have to budget the time for it to happen, and you have to plan exactly what you want to happen. There's a little caveat about planning, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Don't force people to do it. It's nothing worse than people are like, oh, you have to do mandatory, training, blah, blah, blah. If you do have to do security awareness training, that's great, but try to pick something that's fun and engaging. There are plenty of options out there, and I'll go over a few of them. You really want to get them hooked. You really want to focus on training, and this is part of your training, your individual training. It's also part of your company's training. So now that it's a priority, let's start with your people or yourself if you're doing this for personal development. Whether you're starting with a seedling or transplanting a tree, it's time to focus on yourself, or if you're a leader, focus on your team. So just like plants, people have wellness indicators, right? Everyone is different here, but while this isn't the same for everyone, there are some common indicators. This is both for yourself and for the team that you may work with. So this is where I want you to write this down. What are your top 3 wellness indicators? Once you understand what your own wellness indicators are, have a look at your team. If you have a team, have a look at your friends, have a look at your colleagues, and have a look at your family. What are their wellness indicators? Ask them what they think your wellness indicators are. Are they the same thing? For myself, when things aren't going very well, I tend to stop talking. which is shocking, I know. But I go quiet when things start to go bad. I do have depression and anxiety, and I go through those things, and it's a roller coaster. And when I'm at the bottom of that roller coaster, I'm usually quiet. But I also get sarcastic. I get really dark humor. I mean, I kind of like dark humor anyway, but I get a bit more snappy and sarcastic. And I'm very quick to anger. It's definitely something I've been working on with my family to make sure that I'm always calm and not raising my voice. And it's amazing how many things actually get done if you don't holler. But sometimes little things set me off. So I know that I'm not doing so well when those things happen. So that's the tip number 2. Pay attention to the wellness indicators of yourself and your people. Learn what healthy looks like. What are their early indicators of sickness and depression, anxiety? You have internal and external checks for yourself. So be honest with yourself and those around you. I know for us working remotely, it's really difficult, right? Because you don't know how people are doing. And we have this amazing thing with our team that is basically the wellness channel. And we just post how many spoons we have. And any given day we can have anywhere from no spoons, absolutely horrible, I don't have the mental capacity for this, to 10 spoons. I've got spoons to give away. I'll help you with whatever you need. And it's really good at gauging where we're at and where others are at and how we can help each other. So can you tell when your teammate is having a good or a bad day? If you're a manager, can you tell when your team feels like appreciated or valued, respected, or challenged? And do you know when they feel burnt out, when they're overwhelmed or lonely or feel useless? Have you asked others what they see in you so you have that external perspective? So those are some ideas for wellness indicators. So just like plants, security champions have some basic needs to grow. And we're going to stick with the ones we've already discussed, which is soil, water, air, and light, with a little twist. So soil to me is your environment. Now, do you want a garden full of beautiful manicured and sweet-smelling roses, or do you want a sparse collection of weeds? You know, the type of environment you have, the type of soil you have to work with is going to determine what kind of garden you grow. There's nothing wrong with having dandelions. Dandelion tea is fantastic, but you can do better than concrete. So tip number 3, here's where you focus on your environment. So you already have to want it. Now you have to focus on your environment. So before you even start with yourself, is your environment set up for you? Do you have a rich environment full of nutrients and worms and good bacteria? You know, what are some things that you could do to change your environment if you could? The type of soil you have dictates what kind of security champion you're going to grow. So you have the ability to make it the best soil possible. So when I started my work from home life, I actually started in the living room of my house, which is, it's beautiful. It's sunny, a nice sunny spot. You know, when nobody's home, it's fantastic. I have a nice view of the mountains and the yard. But when lockdown happened, everybody was home. My daughter was home and doing online schooling. My husband was home working online himself. He would randomly vacuum while I was trying to have a meeting, so it got uncomfortable and awkward. It wasn't the best environment for me to be in. So I shifted to the back office. And the reason I hadn't done this before was because the back office was cold and it was wintertime and it was a bit dark. But I came in, I rearranged my furniture, and I change it around when I get bored. I have different stuffed animals on the wall, and I have plants. I have lots of plants, which is fantastic. And then I continue to rearrange, my furniture again as I get bored. But it's not always the best environment, but I do have the support and the resources to make improvements when I need it, both from my family and from my employer and from myself. So what support and resources are you provided? Have a think about it, write it down. What do you need? And, what has already been provided that you appreciate? Write down what you like and write down what you need. And if you're a team leader or manager, what can you do to improve your employees' environment? And again, as I said, I work from home, and it was a bit of a struggle initially, and when you have employees in those unique situations, but how to create the best environment for themselves to learn in, and write it down and let them know. So water, content, right? This is just like watering plants. I find content, what you're teaching, what you're learning as a security champion, is the absolute hardest part about learning application security and growing security champions. You can do so much in an excellent environment, but how do you know how much content to take in or to provide? You know, what level are you at? What level is the content at? What's the best style you learn at? Do you learn better in groups or on your own? Okay. So tip number 4, the amount of content you need depends on the person. So you have to get to know your people so you know how much they need. And you have to get to know yourself. There's no way around it. If you don't take the time to research your people, research yourself, only then will you find the best way for them to learn. And you're going to know if it's too much, too little, too much, before it's too late. So here's a few tricks, and I'll have my slides available and I'll have links to all of these things. But there are a bunch of options here. There are books, there are websites, podcasts, CTFs, videos, structured programs, learn your own pace programs, and this excellent community, which we're a part of today with OWASP Melbourne. There are lots of options out there. You don't need to stick with one thing. Or if you've done one thing and it wasn't for you, that's fine. Move on, try something else. I'm not so good at raising peppers or capsicums, as you call them. So I've moved on to other plants. I'm not doing that again. And air, again, these are the insubstantials. So one absolutely amazing thing about training people is they give back, okay? We need to learn. And growing people isn't all about sacrificing your time and effort and, you know, in the person. It comes with a great reward. So Mahatma Gandhi wrote, "Live as if you were to die tomorrow. Learn as if you were to live forever." Security champions are a unique breed of individuals. They tend to have enough technical knowledge to know they don't know everything. They have enough curiosity to not only wonder how things work, but also how they break. But they want to use all of that knowledge and power to improve themselves and improve those around them. So these are all the insubstantial things, air, but it's extremely valuable to both yourself and your organization. And the benefits are huge, regardless of how difficult they are to measure. You, as an employer, you're attracting top employees by providing this training. Increased job satisfaction. I know for myself, I absolutely love it when I have camaraderie and get to learn with my teammates and other people. You, as individually, gain competitive skills and upskill your team. You improve your retention rates of your company because you are providing them a lot of what they're looking for. And internal promotions, so that you can, for yourself, upskill and go for those other jobs, you know, within security and development and beyond, and leadership and everything else. And also you've been training your people, so encourage them to move up, encourage them to promote themselves. And you get an amazing sense of accomplishment, right? You know, like, I have plants that live, yay! You know, when you do go out in the garden, you see everything's growing. Sure, there's weeds in there, that's okay, but everything's growing, and you have this huge sense of accomplishment. And also, the biggest thing is you really instill security as a mindset, because you're providing this training for them, and you're encouraging them to do these things. Or if you're on your own, you're really investigating a slice of technology that is very important to the industry. And finally, let's talk about the last basic need a person requires: light. So this is where I think of recognition. If a plant doesn't get enough light from the sun, its growth will slow down and it eventually dies. And it's the same with a person that doesn't get enough recognition for themselves or from others. So, interesting quote, I'm going to read it because there's a lot of verbiage on the screen. When a manager recognizes an employee's behavior personally and sincerely, both feel proud, gratified, and happy. There's a human connection that transcends the immediate culture to create a shared bond. The power of this bond is stronger than you might think. Indeed, it's the power that holds together great organizational cultures. And that's by a book by Eric Mosley and Derek Irvine, The Power of Thanks. So tip number 6, shine as much light on your people and yourself as they can handle. Not all people like a lot of light, but they all deserve it. This is what I call head pats. I need a lot of head pats. I like to ensure I'm doing a good job so I can maintain my progress and growth and momentum. Not everyone needs a lot of recognition, but learn who needs what as a team leader or manager, or you need to know for yourself what works for your positive reinforcement. And for those individuals out there like me that suffer from imposter syndrome, acknowledge your accomplishments out loud. Tell people about them. Let others tell your story and own it. Own your story. There's nothing more empowering than taking a piece of paper. Again, write this down. Writing at the top of the piece of the paper, I am remarkable because ... And making yourself within a 2-minute time limit, whatever you want to do, write down every single one of your accomplishments that you can think of. And do it all the time. You'll be amazed at how many things you've actually accomplished. If you've never done this before, I would encourage you to try this exercise with a team or your friends or your partner, anyone who knows you. So take 2 pieces of paper, not 4. Well, technically 4 with your partner. So take 2 pieces of paper and something to write with, obviously. 1 piece of paper, write, I am remarkable because. And on the other piece of paper, write, you are remarkable because. And for each one, set the timer for 2 minutes and start writing as soon as the timer starts. So once you're done, trade papers with your partner. Fair warning, there may be tears, there may be blank pages. That's okay. There may be laughter, but there will most certainly be recognition and encouragement. So again, there are additional environmental factors: music, friends, shelter, and love. We all need love, just like plants, right? And with that, I hope you have some tips and tricks to grow your own security champion, whether it's yourself or those around you. You have to want it. Know and understand the wellness indicators of the people around you. Make the best environment you can. Get to know yourself and your employees. Not all rewards are obvious. Shine as much light as you can and don't get discouraged. And with that, I would like to say thank you so much to OWASP Melbourne for having me. And I hope you enjoyed my little gardening adventure and learned a few tips and tricks on how to grow your own security champion.
Thank you, Toni. That was amazing. So often the human side of security is often overlooked, and thanks for highlighting the importance of support and recognition. Well, especially this year, yes to hate pets, so important. And so if just speaking to the audience here, if you have any questions, remember, just head over to the Discord if you need an invite to the Discord. The link is in the description, YouTube description below. Head over to Discord and ask your questions in Chapter AU Melt. We'll be picking that up, and Aaron would be having that. But do we have any questions? Lydia?
Thanks, Daniel. I'll jump straight to the Discord because I can see that there's a couple of questions that's been posted in there. But thank you, Toni. I always love how you put things in perspective to shine a different light and give people a different way of looking at it. I certainly learned a lot myself, so thank you. I'll jump straight to the 2 questions that we've got here, and then I've got one that I think might be useful as well, if you don't mind. So the first one is, how much time do you expect security champions to spend working on security stuff per week, including training, etc., compared to their primary responsibilities? Let's start with that one.
Yeah, well, there's excellent question. It's hard to determine. It is variable. It depends on the person, depends on your team, depends on your company, and how much time you have for it. But you do have to make it a priority. It's definitely a monthly thing that I would encourage. Definitely whether they can run something, whether it's a single security champion or a team of security champions together, they can give some, lunch and learns or some presentations and keep that going monthly. And then I found weekly to be a bit too much because you get into the cycle of things and just weeks get dropped off. But every couple of weeks, it's really nice to have a catch up that's just you focusing on your own personal development, and whether it's learning new things or doing CTFs or catching them on videos. And the thing is if your company provides a little bit of time, an hour every 2 weeks or something like that, then this is something that you can focus on that's in your schedule that doesn't, make sure it doesn't get pushed back to anything else, but it helps you commit to that timeline and it helps you grow and learn.
Thanks, Toni. So almost pop it in your diary, a recurring event sort of thing.
Absolutely.
No, that's great advice. Therefore, you can't miss it like the dentist appointment. Can you recommend any planning guides or write-ups for people who are trying to build a security champion program within their organisation?
Yes. So I don't have a specific one, but when I was doing a little research for this talk, there are tons of, like high-profile security companies like Rapid7. There's lots of people in the OWASP community. So I guess what I would encourage you to do is spend some time, do a little bit of research, just literally look up how, security champion program, like Google it. There is lots of information out there, and a lot of companies have blogs and posts on what they did and what works and what didn't. And again, it's that thing where there's no one silver bullet. You have to try different things for your organization. Don't get discouraged. Start out light, find out who really gets hooked. And for the harder people that don't want to be involved in things, get other people on board, get other people saying, hey, what would actually get Sally into this? What do you think would get her interested in this? Don't force people to take this, but find what clicks for them.
Yeah, and I think you also mentioned, sorry, Andrew, I'll stop in a minute, but I think you also mentioned before, which you could reiterate, that you're saying there's lots of companies that, are starting their own security guilds and obviously encouraging other areas to attend that. So, you can jump on board with that sort of stuff, or writing their own internal blogs and those sorts of things. Andrew, do you have anything that you want to add to that as well?
Yeah, sure. As OWASP actually has been doing this stuff, you can actually look at videos dating back to 2010 on security champions. There's some really good ones there, like from Chris Romeo, building an AppSec program with a budget of 0. Plenty of others as well. So if you go to the OWASP YouTube channel and search for security champion, you'll find at least 20 or 30 videos on the topic dating back more than a decade. It's pretty much, OWASP has always been in advance of trends in the industry, but this is now a very cemented activity, and in companies such as Facebook, Netflix and others, security champions, Riot Games, these folks have security champions through and through.
Thanks, Andrew. Maybe we'll see if we can find those links, Daniel and Aaron, and pop them in the Discord for people that are looking to further extend their organisation's security champion programs. That'd be really useful.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, another question, Toni. Are there any incentives that you've found to work really well within bringing in new security champions?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a very a varied amount of things. Pizza is fantastic if you have an office, and you can throw a few kind of lunch and learns, or things where you bring in a bit of food, and people will just come for the food and maybe get hooked on something else. Competitions, so friendly competitions like CTFs, whether it's internal CTFs or if it's just using the external one, it's really fun. I do know that a lot of companies will do a 1 month kind of challenge and then not think about it again until the next year. So I guess with incentives, it's really important to keep that recognition and keep things going. So not the whole spending the whole Hacktober month on security. Yeah, that's great, that's fantastic. But if you do nothing else for the other 11 months, people are just going to forget about it, and it's going to drop off the radar. And another excellent incentive which we don't have much of anymore, is sending people to conferences, right? So getting people involved in the community. And over lockdown, I think I talked at more virtual conferences this year than I talked at physical conferences last year. So even though you don't have this space, might not necessarily be able to visit people live in person, there are all of these groups going on, and it's really easy to get burnt out on Zoom and on these video things. But the great thing, people record them, people start Discord channels. ComfyCon was the first virtual still part of that community. And being a part of that community is the incentive and the reward that I get. And so then I'm available to people in that space when they ask questions, and I am available, and I have a lot more access to many more people when I have questions myself. So those are a couple of the biggies, I would say. And for you remote workers, and one thing that our company just did for us is for Christmas presents, they bought trees. So for my Christmas present, some trees are growing somewhere, which works in perfectly for my talk, right? So yay, oxygen and growing trees, and fantastic. So little incentives, they don't have to cost a lot of money, but it's really that recognition of your people that is going to keep it going.
Yeah, I guess just in wrapping up too, for those that know Toni and who've followed her career, I mean, she's a real standout for being a security champion, especially when you see her journey, starting off, going back to university, getting her degree, becoming a developer engineer, and really, really, really pushing hard to enter the security community. Toni's a real standout. So make sure you follow her on Twitter. And listen to all her tips, because she knows what she's talking about, and she's really put in the hard yards. So when she talks about priority, she definitely knows what it takes. So I'll just check if there's any other questions here. Andrew just put a comment in here about if you need more information, just search the term the paved road. I know we'll put some extra stuff in the Discord too. Andrew, if you want to explore or expand on that, please feel free. But
it's actually part of my slides. So
there we go. Okay, that's it for me, Dan. I don't know if you or Aaron have any further questions.
Nope, all good from here. Thank you so much, Lydia, and thank you, Toni, for speaking. Really appreciate all that you do. Thank you. We'll go into an intermission for about 3 minutes while we swap over. So go have a break, go do whatever you need, grab a drink, and we'll be right back. Thank you.
Bye.
Hello and welcome back. Up next, we have a speaker which we'd like to welcome home to this chapter. Andrew is a seasoned web application security specialist and enterprise security architect. He is the executive director at OWASP, taking the foundation through an organizational change and taking our mission to the next level. Andrew has worked in the IT industry for over 25 years, and Andrew has researched and developed the web application security and architectural field since 1998. He is a lifetime member of OWASP, former director, and co-leads the OWASP Application Security Verification Standard, ASVS, and the OWASP Top 10 projects. As an Australian expat of Melbourne and Sydney, also an ex-Melbourne chapter lead, he currently lives in the US with his family. Let's give this legend a warm welcome. Take it away, Andrew.
Thanks. I must preface that when I was the Melbourne chapter lead, I lived in Sydney, and I flew back so frequently that it was actually possible for me to actually do the Melbourne chapter meetings. But quite frankly, I was so glad when other people took it over, because that was not likely. And these days, we actually have some basic rules that encourage people to live within 80 kilometres of the chapters they lead. So obviously laissez-faire back then. Thank you so much. I do actually have some news for you, Daniel. The Australian entity is Go. We are actually in the process of finalising that now. So there will be an Australian entity very shortly. And to the global AppSec for AppSec Days Australia, you're going to be a global event next year. So we're going to move forward very, very fast on those two things. So very, very happy to move things along.
Fantastic. Thank you.
This is actually really good news for the Australian chapters, because we can now obviously do GST invoicing and all sorts of other things as well. And obviously being a global event, you'll be able to have more than the usual number of sponsors and things like that. I'm sure that everyone will be getting on board with that. Okay. So obviously I have been in the industry for some time. This is a slight rehash of the 2018 keynote that I gave to AppSec EU. I have updated it a little bit. I've removed some of the negativity from it, because this year doesn't need any more negativity. And I just want to more or less bounce off some of the ideas of the previous talk. For example, I am trying to get OWASP to partner with one or more mental health organizations, because I think in this time where everyone's working from home, this is my home office. I've worked from home for more than a decade, and so and traveled extensively. But I know that everyone is used to that, and I do see people struggling. And so I think it's really important for people to keep on top of their mental health. And so I am trying to actually do some partnerships with folks such as Blue Hackers and others. So if you actually do have any of those concerns, feel free to approach me offline. Okay, let's get on with it. So AppSec in the 2020s, past, current, and the future. Lots of ground to cover. The past is a foreign country. They do things differently there. And the guy's going, actually... Well, the reality is, unfortunately, we're still stuck in some ruts that haven't moved forward. I'll discuss the reason why that might be and ways that might solve that. I think we need to stop working on some things and work on some other things instead. So let's go ahead and talk about those things. So here we have a clip, a seminal clip from the 2001 movie. This is how it was when we were doing code reviews and penetration tests back in 1998. We were looking at the code, wondering what it was, smelling it, sniffing it, banging it, and just seeing what would happen if we actually managed to do anything with it. Unfortunately, this is roughly how things were for some period of time. And one of the first projects that I got involved with OWASP was the OWASP Developer Guide. And essentially what I did was I could see that other people at OWASP were busy documenting what they knew, and I knew some things that they didn't know. So I was contributing that. And in the process, and I didn't realize this until much later, I'd probably discovered the equivalent of a CWE, like an entire collection of things, because I was just writing down what I knew. And I just worked backwards from first principles. And so it's really important for us to realize that this field has been one that's been constantly evolving off the shoulders of others, the shoulders of giants. And, you know, from my perspective, you know, I see people giving bugs names and things like that, and you distill it, and it's like something we discovered back in, you know, 98, 99, 2000, 2001. So I'm not saying that what we're doing today is irrelevant or not worthy. What it is we haven't really had a chance to move on very much. And I really want us to move forward as an industry, and there's certain ways that we can do that. So, top 10, one of the projects I co-lead. I actually did the 2007 version. Once I did the 2007 version, I realized it was entirely the wrong approach. Unfortunately, telling developers what not to do when there's an entire universe of things they should be doing isn't the right thing to do. If you look at CWE, there's over 1,200 different categories of issues now, and I dare any one of you to be able to name even more than 20 or 30 of them. I'm actually on the CWE board now, and we still have concerns about some of the things that are in there. So what I'm trying to get across here is that we need to move on to more of a positive mindset. So when I was preparing the OWASP Top 10 2017, I came across this document. This is the very first Nist special publication. This actually predates Nist's existence by 1 year. And it was released in April of 1976. And you've got to realize that government agencies move fairly slowly, so this was probably prepared in 1974 and 1975. And they had the OWASP Top 10 back then. Incomplete parameter validation, inconsistent parameter validation, implicit sharing of privileged and confidential data, asynchronous validation, inadequate serialization. That's something we didn't get until the 2017 version of the OWASP Top 10. Inadequate identification, authorization, and authentication, violable prohibitional limit, which is business logic flaws, and exploitable logic errors. So when we look at these things, these map on to the OWASP Top 10 pretty strongly. And the reality is that the fact that more than 30 or 40 years later, we're still having the same things, we haven't learned. And this is a problem. So I don't think we should be blaming developers for not getting this right. Now, the history of this document is actually rather interesting, because as soon as it came out, the government decided that it was classified. By government, I mean the US government. And so they actually classified it, and most people didn't know about it. The interesting thing is, once it actually became available as an unclassified document, I was able to read it. Asynchronous validation, you got to remember, this was in a time when people were doing batch jobs via tape. So essentially, mainframes with one CPU processing one thing after another, and these folks were already thinking about asynchronous validation, essentially race conditions and TOC2 issues, which are now endemic across pretty much every Node.js application, and many Java applications, and any sort of framework where people are thinking that they're actually using a single-threaded environment, and it's not. So think about the number of cores that you have in a typical server today. The epic processors, for example, if you have 2 of those in a system, you're going to have 256 cores. The reality is you're going to use those 256 cores. We absolutely do need to be aware of asynchronous and TOC2 issues. And I think, honestly, this will become an issue that will haunt us for some time until we come up with better ways of thinking about asynchronous and stateless environments. The rest of it, exploitable logic errors, we still don't even have in the OWASP Top 10, and yet it is one of the major ways that people get massive loss. And this is where the top 10 starts to fall down. The top 10 concentrates on the likelihood of something occurring and then the risk of that thing occurring. So essentially, how many times did this particular piece of information turn up in people's code reviews or CVEs or whatever the source of the data may be? And we're working on collection of data right now for the 2021 version. If you have any data you wish to contribute to that, please get onto Brian Glass immediately, because we are about to do the data processing. We have data on 225,000 applications. So the reality is it's one of the largest data collections we've ever had. So we'll probably be correct about the issues, but probably not correct about the impact. And I want to include business logic flaws, but we'll see what the data says. I do think some of these things that they decided were pretty big issues back in 1976 are still pretty big issues today in 2020. And that's sort of sad. This document came out in 1976. I was 6 years old. I was 1 year away from using my first computer that I had access to on a regular basis, which was a Commodore PET. I learnt BASIC on that. The reality is that back then they were already thinking these things, and yet we still haven't made any reasonable strides to make these things go away. And you'll see that in the end, I do talk about things that we need to work on so that we can concentrate on the more important things, such as business logic flaws. This paper is where 30-day passwords come from. And this is why 30-day passwords are absolute crap. Even this paper mentions that they're absolute crap and shouldn't be used, but they mention them, and yet that's obviously without something they could implement and put into standards, and therefore they got introduced into the Orange Book, and then it got into the common criteria, and then it got into the ISO standards, and then voila, we've been burdened with this ridiculous problem forever. So what does it actually mean? I hate builds. I really hate builds. I'm sorry, I'm not good at them. I don't like them, but I've used builds. So this table is for a PDP-11, the literal definition of 1 million instructions per second. The PDP-11 in single user mode on a more or less a research version of Unix back then, going at a weaker algorithm than we use today, with no hashing, could actually crack every single 5-character password in 31 days. This is what this actually means, the 760 hours here. Most people's passwords, 36 lowercase letters and digits, was what they tried to crack, and they were able to succeed. This happens to be 31 days. So 30-day passwords became the norm for changing them. The fact that everybody's phone, including the really rubbish ones you can buy at garages, are able to crack passwords at billions, and I mean literally billions of times faster than a PDP-11, hasn't been reflected in our standards, with one exception. Nist 800-63 prohibits it. And we made that the same in the OWASP Top 10 2017. We prohibit it because it's a ridiculous control. If you're still doing password rotation, please stop. Absolutely, please stop. It's a ridiculous control. You cannot change your password fast enough to actually get past why this control existed and why it's a ridiculous control and what is better choice. We at OWASP have prohibited this in the ASVS. We have prohibited this in the OWASP Top 10, and NIST 800-63 has prohibited it, and I'm really hopeful that ISO 27000 will prohibit it too. It is a ridiculous control. Yet this actually shows the hubris of our industry, telling developers and practitioners and risk managers what they wanted to have because they didn't know anything better. And we didn't do the proper research to actually say that this is such a ridiculous control, we should do something different. And that is a recurring theme throughout our industry. We absolutely do need to stop telling people what to do. We need to have more of an interaction with them and come up with some better solutions. The other one that actually has infected our industry for a long time is the idea of a desk check, an independent desk check, where you go in and do a penetration test or a bug bounty or a code review, and you're at this arm's distance from the developers. And we often think of it as an independent audit. But the reality is, unless you're a CPA, like a qualified accountant, you are not an auditor. We should never have gone down this pathway. True audits, like the ones that OWASP has just gone through, happen once every 3 years. And they actually use a sampling of the information that we provide them to make sure that the controls are present, working, and the books are a good statement of what we actually do. And the good work that we do is because every single month we do reconciliation. Every process we have tries to make it as transparent as possible so that if anybody's doing something a little bit naughty or trying to take advantage of us, it becomes really obvious really quickly. And that's because our accountants and our operations staff are doing it every single day, not because of an audit that happens once every 3 years. And yet this is the mode that the AppSec industry took, is we're doing code reviews, we're doing penetration tests. And then there are many, many, many companies that owe their entire existence to this. It's wrong. We can't keep on doing this anymore. We need to move on. And I'm glad that actually, as you'll come to see in a future slide, we are moving on. Not everybody's got the message yet, but we are moving on. There are some ugly things, AppSec culture. And in fact, this set of slides actually contains some slides about dude bros and the toxic culture that you can find on Twitter. And I've decided that 2020 doesn't need any more of that, so I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about mental health. The reality is, even today, I saw someone that I respect struggle to the point where they actually wrote the word struggling into Twitter just for everyone to see. This is something that I think is really important for us as an industry, is to understand that, you know, to be really good at AppSec and information security in general requires us to think evil. It requires us to think in ways that most people don't think. And that means that we're quite odd compared to the general population. And that actually has some negative consequences for many of us, including myself. I have anxiety and depression, and I'm on medication for it. The reality is that I have still succeeded despite all those things. Have I struggled at times? Absolutely. Don't struggle alone. This is something that I'm really passionate about, and you'll see some work that we're going to, partner up with some mental health folks focused on our industry in the next year. And I hope that you get involved. There is no shame in saying there is some issues in our industry around mental health, burnout, and other things. As I said, we need to be somewhat special to be able to do what we do really well. And I really encourage you to take the time over Christmas to recharge those batteries and, think about how much better 2021 will be, and put this year behind us. Just going on the negative just for a little bit, I just don't want to concentrate on it. I don't want us to victim blame anymore. Users are not at fault for privacy breaches or password dumps. That's absolutely not their fault at all. But the fact is that if you go to Have I Been Pwned, you can find that I've been pwned about 8 or 9 times, and it doesn't matter. My LinkedIn password was breached in 2012. I had 2-factor authentication already turned on. It was already a 32-character password. The heat death of the universe will occur before you actually discover what that password is. But even then, it's irrelevant because I use a password manager and I have a different password ever since I knew it was breached. But I'm not at fault for that. We should stop saying to users, don't click things. The problem is the fact that clicking things is unsafe. There is a certain level of education that we do need people to do to become a bit more resilient against misinformation, dishonesty, and scams and things like that, so they can recognize them for what they are, but they're not at fault for clicking emails that look legitimate. In many countries, such as Australia, there is only a limited number of financial organizations. There's a limited number of telcos, limited number of power organizations. And if you create a good-looking facsimile of what those sort of communications are, you might get some click-through. And you've got to remember, it's not about me or you not falling for those things. It's about the millions of people that would have received that same communication. So what I want to do is stop blaming people for things that aren't their fault. We shouldn't be saying things, don't click stuff. We should be making clicking stuff so safe that the attackers give up on it. We shouldn't be saying to developers, you're at fault because no one bothered to teach you at university that you didn't learn anything about application security, because in my case, there was not even a single course. The field did not exist. Yet am I at fault for not knowing how to code securely back in 1990? No. It's an evolving industry. Should developers know about application security? Absolutely they should. But just like a speciality like games development or engineering, there should be folks who go that long step further for an application security career and yet still be a developer. And I would like to see more of those folks. But the average developer, like an engineer, should actually know that there are things that they don't know. And here is a basic introduction to it, and away we go. But they're not at fault if they never learnt it. And just as we see with FireEye got hacked. Now, if any organization got hacked, the FireEye is the one that I would expect not to be hacked. It was actually very brazen of the people who did it. Very few people probably could have detected that, and I bet FireEye detected it much earlier than most of us could, yet they still got hacked. The reality is they're not at fault. If you're up against someone who's that good, who's that brazen, you are going to get hacked. You need to limit the opportunity for this to be a big issue, and I think FireEye is doing a tremendous job of managing the communications on this issue. We should never be using fear, uncertainty, and doubt as a key selling feature of our industry. If you're saying to someone, you should get us to come in and have a look at something because you might get hacked, is this a sort of shakedown that the mafia does. We don't do that. We should be opposite. If we can't present ourselves in a way that is very positive, I think we've lost that battle, and it doesn't work for very long. One of the ones that I must admit, when I was in the early part of my career, I did this occasionally. There were some times when I had to tell people that they really just needed to rewrite their code. And the way I went about it was probably less than great. You learn quickly. For example, to give you an idea, Laura Bell, the founder of SafeStack.io, and I have worked together. She now lives in New Zealand, obviously. This industry, along with all the other industries in Australia and the world, are very, very small. You know everybody, and given time, you will become connected with everybody as well. By getting a reputation for being blunt or calling things out in a very negative way, particularly if you're not an active developer in that language or framework. At a time when I was doing a lot of code reviews, I would consider myself a Java specialist, but I wasn't an active developer. My opinion of their code was probably irrelevant. My solutions to actually help them come up with a better alternative was probably irrelevant. And if I look back at the OWASP developer guide when I was offering people code snippets to actually improve things, I now see that I got it wrong too. We should be working together with developers to actually come up with a much better solution together than to actually tell people, your code is ugly, this is the way you fix it. We don't know the true way of fixing it. The thing about development is that there's so many different ways of fixing code that is not quite right. Our skill is identifying code or apps or features or whatever the case may be. Our skill is in identifying that can be abused, not in how necessarily we fix it. So today, is it any better? Well, actually, it sort of is, actually. The OWASP Top 10 is known to many developers. When I go to developer conferences and I talk to developers on a regular basis, they're actually aware of the OWASP Top 10. Now, it could be confirmation bias because, well, I'm invited because the OWASP organization is well known. It has got to a place now that most developers, particularly those in senior positions, do know at least the OWASP Top 10 and that exposes them to application security. We do need to do a much better job, and so the marketing push that I'm putting the foundation through at the moment is actually to think about, instead of talking to people we've already talked to for 20 years, how do we reach out to developers directly? And I want us to engage directly with the developer community and really get out there and become well known in the developer community. Sql Injection nearly didn't make the cut in the OWASP Top 10 2017, and in fact in the 2021 data I'm expecting it not to make the cut. This is incredible, and it's a testament to the work that the OWASP Foundation and all of you have done over the years. The reality is it's now very rare to find Sql Injection. When you do find it, it's because the developers never knew there was an alternative and the frameworks didn't support them in doing a safer alternative. That's actually quite rare today. And for those who are using React, Next.js, and other frameworks like Flutter, there is no cross-site scripting. You actually have to go out of your way to shoot yourself in the foot. Cross-site scripting is becoming difficult and rare. Also, the techniques for doing DOM-based XSS, which were first researched and announced in the early parts of the 2004, 2005 era, DOM-based XSS is still quite the black art. And it's very difficult to get people to exploit themselves, even if it is exploitable, because one-click attacks and whatnot are just, it's difficult to get things happening in such a component-based environment. Our industry has matured a bit. I'll talk about that in a future slide. But the reality is that because we are being forced to go along with the Agile train, 20 years after it went mainstream, like I have a book over there on XP, Extreme Programming, one of the first Agile methodologies, that was released in 2000. It is now 2020. And the fact is we're only just getting on board with, okay, we're going to do 15 to 100 releases today. How do we actually penetration test that? You can't. So how do you make it secure? Well, we need a different approach. We are getting aboard the Agile train. We are learning the techniques that actually leverage the same tools as developers, and that's actually really important. I think that's an amazing change. Devsecops. Now, when Devsecops first came out, it was DevOps, and it's still called DevOps in most organizations. The reality is we work with developers, but not as an adversary. We are part of the team. We build code together. One of the things that I like about DevSecOps is that because it's in the name, it's one of the key functional, non-functional requirements that has some functional elements that ends up being included every single time. Many parts of DevOps, if you like performance or maintainability, didn't get into DevSecOps' name. DevSec is actually a first class issue in this. I like that. One of the things that I was really interested in when I was talking with one of the founders of the Agile Manifesto is, why didn't they include anything about security in the manifesto? For those of you who have not read the Agile Manifesto, I do recommend it. It's obviously a period piece now, but it actually influenced a generation of developers, and it is the way that software is developed today, so it's worthwhile reading the understanding. He said to me that constraints were always a part of DevOps. They're always part of the Agile methodology. And yet, if you look at the average user story pad or go to Jira, create a story, create a task, create a bug, constraints aren't a first-class inclusion there. Yet the gentleman said that they were actually expecting people to get the little 4x3 cards and on the back write the constraints. So as a user on the front, I should be able to look and edit my own profile. On the back, there should have been a constraint. As a user, I should not be able to see or edit anyone else's profile. Yet that second part was never highlighted in the manifesto, and I think that's sort of held people back. So that's why I put the safety third logo there. The reality is that we are getting there. We are working on it, but it would be lovely if the tools and the standard processes that the developers use included constraints, which is the way we get security stories into the development process. Okay, let's keep moving. The paved road, now this links into one of the questions that we had earlier on how do we actually generate champions. You should absolutely look up paved road. This is how Netflix does it. This is how a lot of organizations do it. If you watch any of the OWASP YouTube videos about Netflix, it'll be about the paved road. It includes security champions or security partners. They're pretty much synonymous now, where a person who's specialist in security is also a developer and helps developers build secure code. They are responsible for reducing friction. They want to make sure the fastest path to production is also the most secure. If you do it any other way, it's slower, and it's also less secure. And obviously, it's built automatically. So these are processes, master builds of AMIs, or whatever the case may be. We build better every single build because we're building it automatically the same every single time. This is a really incredible technique, and Netflix has been doing it for the better part of a decade. Everybody else is catching up with them. You don't have to be a unicorn with infinite funding and massive customer numbers to be able to do the same thing. Do watch some videos on how Netflix does security. They have done many presentations on it. It's really worthwhile. I would also recommend having a look at the Netflix OSS repositories on GitHub. There are plenty of excellent tools in there like Chaos Monkey and others that go out there and kill machines randomly to see how it holds up. So for those who are ever interested in the confidentiality, integrity, and availability aspects of security, availability, Chaos Monkey is part of the availability aspect. They absolutely always, they sometimes, even in the middle of someone watching a stream, they will kill the thing that's streaming the thing to you to make sure that it still works. Everybody should learn from those sorts of tools. And that's not even a more recent one. That one I think dates from like 2013 or something. So it's not even a modern tool. It's something that's sort of historical at this point. So security automation, use the same tools as the devs. If they're using Visual Studio Code, you're going to use Visual Studio Code. If they're using IntelliJ, use IntelliJ. Use the same tools. Use the same test suite. Use the same build process. And then it becomes maintainable. So when things go on and code changes, developers can maintain it for themselves. If you use a random language, like if the developers are not familiar with, like, for example, Python, and that's how you've written your code, they probably won't maintain it correctly and it'll become stale. If you use the same tools, language, and frameworks that they use, the likelihood is extremely high that they can maintain it without your help. You can also train them on how to do those things. I would encourage you to look into things like GitHub Actions, API testing with OpenAPI, OWASP and Zest. Now, Zest is obviously a language of its own, but it actually exposes an API, and you can use a number of languages to talk directly to Zap and automate it. What you're seeing on screen at the moment is actually Protractor. Protractor is an automated test suite for Node.js applications, and the last time I looked at it, he had over 700 test cases to prove that OS Juice Shop is a wonderfully correct application that just happens to be the most security buggy application in existence as well. So what I'm trying to get at here is that, you know, Bjorn has written a test suite that validates the application end to end every single time that he wants to do a release. And so he knows he can release with confidence, and he doesn't have to do that. I remember when I worked at a bank in the mid-2000s, our 70 or 80 case test suite that looked at retail internet banking took 3 months to execute. If you used Protractor and just executed those things, it would be over in about 5 to 10 minutes. You could literally do it every single build. Also look at cloud configuration tools. There are so many great tools today to help you automate security. You shouldn't be looking at it from the point of view that this is going to put me out of a job. You should be looking at this as, how do I actually do something that allows me to test an application every time it goes into production, which could be hundreds of times a day. Your value is in automating this stuff, not in performing it, okay? So don't get stuck on the idea that you're going to be put out of a job by automation. There's more code than you can point a stick at. You'll be in business for a long time. Come on. So what's the future? Well, I actually have a fairly positive outlook on this. We are actually making some progress. Obviously, 2020 hasn't been a great year for anyone, but there are some things that are looking up. By actually starting to think about what are the big problems, I do think security architecture, like back in the mid-2000s, we had enterprise architects, pretty much every major organization. Most of them have lost that functionality because, well, there wasn't a lot of value in it. Yet security architecture is a really big thing, and I'd like to see an OWASP project come alive to help with security architecture. But I think it needs to be more dynamic than it used to be. We need to be able to reverse engineer code and produce a security architecture around that reverse engineering. Using threat modeling and tools like Cornucopia or other sort of threat modeling tools like Threat Dragon and other ones that allows you to quickly come up with what are the problems that we might see. Therefore, we need to actually build some constraints into the code to protect against that. Threat modeling is the fastest possible way of doing it. Is it the same thing as Stride and Dread? No. Today's threat modeling has moved on. It's important for us to keep evolving threat modeling to evolve with the agile methodology. I'd also like to see more capabilities based access control. You see this in Android. You see this in research operating systems like Fuchsia. Fuchsia is, yes, Dan, we should absolutely formalize a security architecture project. Yes, please start one. We should absolutely be looking at capabilities access control. What I mean by this is, does this user have the ability to access the camera? Does this user have the ability to access all of the contacts or just some of them? If you think about the most recent version of iOS, if you use iPhones, you actually get to select photo by photo what the tools like Facebook or Instagram can actually see. And therefore, you're not giving up every single photo on your phone. You are giving up the photos you wish to share. This is capabilities-based access control, and I do think this is a game changer for privacy. We absolutely do need to work on privacy some more. If you think about the big deals back in 2017 with the XXE and whatnot, it wasn't the fact that XXE was a big deal. It was that half the American population had their privacy violated permanently. And they need to produce way more documentation now to get things like loans and whatnot, because their social security numbers and all of their private information was leaked. It wasn't their fault, but we need to improve applications' protections of end-to-end privacy. Strangely enough, even though GDPR is the privacy regulation everyone talks about because there's huge fines, the reality is APP 11, the Australian Privacy Principles, actually has some really good technical controls that even talk about things like, for example, privacy is not about stopping other people from reading your stuff, although that's an element of it. It's also about if someone can update someone else's record without permission, that's also a privacy breach. So think about APP 11 when you design your applications. And in fact, that's actually something we built into the Application Security Verification standard. Business logic flaws will be with us forever. And unfortunately, they are not going away because we didn't do enough threat modeling when things first came out. As the technical bugs go down, people have got more time to look for business logic flaws. And I would recommend that everybody looks for access control and business logic flaws, put in negative numbers, violate all the constraints you can to make sure that they're not violable. That's coming back to that 1976 issue. So Agile is the only game in town. If there's anything that we're doing that isn't Agile, we have to get rid of it. There's just no point in doing penetration testing anymore. There are certain examples where doing a big test once every 3 years still has some point, but it's a point-in-time exercise that proves nothing even 2 months from now. We should be doing Agile and Agile only. There is no other game. So one of the reasons I like companies like SafeStack is that they build around that entire Agile methodology. They didn't start from, let's do testing a little bit at a time. They started from the point of view, how do we make it permanently better? That's what you need to do. And that's why I think companies like SafeStack will have a bright future. I encourage everybody to think about how do you actually do what you do today, but in an Agile way? How do you help your clients? How do you help your developer teams to permanently be better? let's work with the frameworks. When I did the OWASP Developer Guide, I was hoping that developers would fix cross-site scripting or SQL injection, but the reality is the best and biggest strides that we've actually ever had were because frameworks like React made it almost impossible to do cross-site scripting. So just like, for example, some of the Scandinavian countries have a desired goal of 0 road deaths by a certain date, we should go for those big ideas. No cross-site scripting, no injections, and no passwords. And I mean no passwords. I don't mean password breaches. I mean no passwords by 2040. If we can start thinking about these big ideas, how do we get there? We are actually going to be able to, change the world. We're going to change the conversation from this was an interesting hack because someone had a great tool that knew how to do a technique X. No, it's because someone actually managed to think about a business logic flaw and an access control issue in a way the developers didn't. Help build and adopt secure platforms such as Fuchsia. If you're not familiar with Fuchsia, it's sort of like what Google's thinking about for the next generation of Chromebooks and Android phones. Go and have a look at it. It's actually interesting. It's a very interesting project. I'd like to see it actually in something, but at the moment it's a very good, interesting operating system. Go and have a look. And obviously safer system languages such as Rust and Go, both of those are memory safe. And what I do mean safe. You can still do unsafe things because they are system languages, but it is obvious when you're doing those unsafe things. Get involved. Help people produce better code by, if they're starting something greenfield, get them to work towards using less unsafe stuff and more safe stuff like React. Let's fix our culture. Let's help everybody understand it's much better to have a conversation with someone who will eventually agree with you, like change my mind. Work with them. Don't tell them they're bad. Don't tell them the code is ugly. Don't have that toxic culture, but embrace everyone. There are so many people who have more skills than us in so many different fields. It's the ultimate hubris to actually think that we know it all and therefore our way is the only way. Let's work together. Let's fix our culture. Let's get onto the Agile train. Okay, and that is the end of the talk. Let me just see if there is a... there is some notes here. Yeah, so Toni made a mention that she had to actually get back involved with the developer community because she was feeling siloed. Is Toni still on and can talk about that?
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. So yeah, awesome talk. Thank you, Andrew. That was fantastic. It was hard to actually keep up with the questions because everything you said, I was like, yep, yep. I agree. But yeah, I as a person who went into software engineering, I actually remember my other point as well. But so I did a full university degree later in life, and then went into software engineering. And found myself really interested in security, so I joined the community. Got heavily involved in the security community, and then when I got to work in security, and all of a sudden I'm working in security. I'm working with a lot of these developers, but I'm really siloed in the security community. Now I have to do the hard yards to get back into the development community. So I was talking backstage with Lydia a little bit about this, about how, yeah, this is a common theme. Do you find this as a common theme yourself? And do you have some kind of tips and tricks to get out of it?
Yeah, so let me just see if I've got it to hand. Oh, no, it's over there. I recently got back into, I found exactly the same thing. I had to get back into developing. There's no way other than to be a practitioner. So I actually picked up some Go. I play a game called Elite Dangerous. It relies heavily upon third-party tools. I did some Go work to actually work out the best shields that the game can have. That was interesting. I recently picked up a book on Rust because I wanted to learn more about how Rust works, and I've got to be saying I'm flummoxed. Without having a project to work on, I don't understand it. And this is actually one of those things that I probably won't end up being a Rust developer anytime soon. I think Go is probably more my thing. But I think the only way for me to get good at it again is to actually do it.
Yeah, totally agree. I find the same thing. I'm starting to crave development projects again and doing my own things. I guess the other thing I wanted to quickly highlight, agree with, is the university does not teach security, application security whatsoever. I finished university as recently as 2016 at a top level APAC university, and didn't really teach security. It was just not even an option. I had no idea really until I started working in the software engineering industry that application security was an option, or that even testing was an option. You get so focused on just doing these degrees to become a software engineer that you miss all of the other opportunities in the workforce.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things I would get people to be involved with is our education committee is actually coming up with both a tertiary curriculum and an industry syllabus. I would encourage everybody. John DeLeo in New Zealand is actually one of the leaders there. Dan.
We just had our meeting like 2 days ago about it. Yeah, and definitely it's talking about the whole how we then get more people into cybersecurity, what's the pathways, so on and so forth. Sorry, back to you, Andrew.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I would encourage everybody who feels like they've got something to teach. I've done a lot of training in my time and I've always enjoyed it. Every time I've taught developers, I've learned something new as well. So it's a bi-directional and learning experience for everybody. I would encourage people to get involved in the education committee if they're interested in helping formalize a proper AppSec curriculum.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. I mean, as Toni was saying, we were sort of talking backstage, and many know that I started off as a dev as well a long time ago in the early 2000s. But now as a security architect, when you're getting involved in, projects that need to be automated via pipelines, and there's all these different new coding languages, I don't know what half of them are. Like yourself, Andrew, and probably you, Toni, I was like the Java and the C and the C++, and even thrown a bit of assembly in there. That's going back in the 90s. So as security professionals, I think, we've got to acknowledge that. I love the message that you said. We shouldn't be telling them how to code. We shouldn't be assuming, or telling them their baby's ugly simply because, a vulnerability scan or a pen test found a vulnerability in their code. That's not how we are going to succeed as a team.
Absolutely. I'm just seeing a question here about the Security Champions program. The AppSec virtual conferences, we got all the videos. I got a little bit of bad news today that our events director is moving on to a different firm. So I will make sure that she ends up publishing those somewhere soon before she goes, which will be... it's good for her that she's actually moving her career forward, but it's sad for us because she did a tremendous job with such difficulty this year as well. Greybeard, I would suggest that the videos for Global AppSec will be up soon. I just don't know when and where.
Andrew, I did have one question for you. You mentioned during the talk, so sort of pedaling back a little bit, we were talking about victim blaming, and it's
Yes.
a topic that I'm seriously passionate about, because I remember in my first year in security, unfortunately, I was doing a vulnerability scan and brought down a whole bunch of ATMs. Now, whilst I did that, when we were doing the post-incident report, victim blame because I didn't implement, quas thresholding, and I flooded the bandwidth and all that. And at the time, you're young and you're like, okay, it's my fault. Now, obviously, if someone in my 40s, if I see that, I know it's a process. Something's missing. There's something broken in the chain, and you don't want to make, somebody that's just started out made to feel it's their fault. What advice would you give companies or people in leadership, perhaps that still, will point the finger? What can we do to change that dialogue?
We need to get towards the aviation industry. They have a blame-free culture. that if there is an incident or issue, they look into it, they come up with recommendations, there is no blame, because otherwise people won't report issues. And that's actually made the aviation sector one of the safest in the world, even though it's often got companies that are trying to minimize costs everywhere. They are still the safest in the world because they learnt from their mistakes. A blame-free culture is a good culture. It's a less toxic culture that gets the work done, and it still allows people to do things in a low-cost environment. So anybody who thinks that victim blaming, like, this is your problem, you're out, that throws away the experience of that person. For example, if you think about, as a penetration tester, we've all done things that accidentally took production out, all of us. We learn from that experience to say, sayonara, you're not honest, you're not with us anymore because you took someone's production out. Well, you're not going to do that again because you'll have learned, maybe 30 or 40 threads on Burp Suite is not a great idea. But what I'm trying to get across is you learn from your mistakes, and a blame-free environment is the best way of learning.
Yeah, I just to add to that as well, when you're looking into training programs and security programs, look for the programs that are not going to compromise your trust with your employees. There are certainly phishing campaigns out there that will prey upon people's situations. There's a lot of training that you really want to focus on, that blame-free training. You want to focus on getting people to interact with you, report things to you, talk to you. Don't put them at a point where they have to report to you again that they fell for the training program and get punished or singled out in any way. It needs to be anonymous, and it needs to be the type of training that people are going to want to continue to do because it's fun and it's encouraging and they're learning things and they're not getting shut down.
Yeah. An example of that is that I actually did some training with some folks from a company in Japan, and it was silent. No one wanted to raise any of the dirty laundry that almost every development team has. So I don't think they got very good value out of it because they didn't ask any questions. I don't think there was a translation gap because their English was excellent. It wasn't that. It was just simply they didn't, for whatever cultural or I got to say corporate culture was probably shutting them down. And I think they got less from the experience because they weren't able to ask the questions they wanted to ask.
Yeah, I've seen that before working with some of the APAC regions as well. It can be, from a corporate perspective, there's a lot less questions that are asked. I've noticed that even between conferences that I would attend in Singapore versus the USA, the level of questions and challenges that you get really are quite varied. Absolutely.
Yeah. I've done training in the US where I've been shown the production code in the training environment saying what's wrong with this because they're a little bit stuck. Whereas other places, as I said, no questions, no information. It was very, it was dull for them and dull for me.
Yeah, that's right. Any questions and you can hear the crickets in the room. And you're like, come on, throw something at me. I'll do a dance, even if you just for one question. I'll just check if there's any other questions. Otherwise, Daniel, you drive us. I've got plenty of questions up my sleeve to ask Andrew. I think it's an absolute privilege and honour to have him here, so it's exciting. If you're willing to answer our questions. Just seeing if there's anyone in the Discord that wants to ask a couple of questions. I did like how you mentioned the Netflix open source tools and obviously bringing up FireEye and that we can bring up all those other companies that have been breached. But I love the fact that they'll wear this their heart on their sleeves and be transparent about what's happened. And again, it goes back to blame culture, doesn't it? Why should we? They're being transparent. They want us to learn and. Are open source tools a good thing or a bad thing? I still think they're a great thing. I love the fact that, we're an open source community helping each other because that's how we're all going to learn. What are your thoughts on this, Andrew?
I really, really, really loved the way that they released IOCs for their tools that they thought were stolen. The fact is now everybody has Yara rules that can actually say these tools, which are quite advanced, most of them, I was looking through the list, are actually open source tools that everyone knows. There's a few there that I don't think anyone knows. And I'm just really pleased that they released the IOCs for that and shared, because that says to me, this is about trust. And that blame-free culture and trust means that people in the future, I mean, it's bad for them right now because some people are thinking that they don't have their crap together, but, you know, they do. They absolutely do. They have incident response that's first class. They're doing the right thing. They actually help the rest of the community out by releasing the IOCs. That actually will improve the overall, that'll actually make some of these tools completely useless to the people who attack them. But it's really about what you know. And I don't think the people who attacked them needed any of the tools that they stole.
No, and I think you made a really good point, because at the end of the day, if an advanced adversary wants to get in, they're going to do it. You know, and there's nothing that you can do to really stop the path that they're on. Yeah, no, absolutely agree. A question that I know I always I like to pick your brains about, and I know we discussed this a couple of weeks ago, myself and a colleague, Andrew, we were talking about, I guess one of my bugbears is that, you know, when you're dealing with pen tests, a lot of the time companies will stick to the OWASP top 10, and that's great as a start. But I mean, as you explore, you know, the ASVS, there's just so much goodness in there, you know, that we really should be deep diving and exploring controls and even some of the testing regime that's in there. What can we do to sort of get some of the word out there? Because there's some goodness in there, and I know the document's long, but it's a fantastic document that I think is not utilized enough.
Well, in the 2017 version, the first step was to actually mention it in the top 10, so the developers could actually see what a better version would be anyway, because it's all written in the ASVS is written in terms of tests, like verify blah. So it's much easier to adapt the top 10 from the ASVS than the other way around. I think the ASVS itself could probably use a level 0. These are the ones that you absolutely must do, and we could probably promote that as a separate thing, link it with the proactive controls. I don't know. I think we need to have a unified message on what those proactive controls and those essential tests should be. There's way too many items in the ASVS now. I think we need to go for a cull. But that said, I think the top 10 should evolve as well. And this is something during the writing phase, we should be basically saying things, these are the worst things that could happen, but this is how you resolve it in the top 10 best ways. Maybe bringing the top 10 proactive controls and the top 10 together would be a good thing for the industry as a whole.
Absolutely, thanks for that.
I think on that, Lydia, coming from the pen test side of things, obviously using the testing guide through OWASP was one thing that I absolutely used as resource, but it is absolutely overwhelming. Okay. And a lot of times in pen tests, you only have a couple of days to really get through the nitty gritty of things, and you can't go through and tick everything off the list. And so depending on, you know, all those variables, more guidance around when to use what, where, you know, like that basic, you know, if you're working on a modern framework, you know, you can kind of zip through, you know, and really focus on these few things. So a bit more direction, I guess, for people would be awesome.
So I would recommend... Oh, sorry.
I was going to say, and I'm deliberately throwing it in there to create conversation. I'm trying to be a little bit controversial here, because we all know that when you do a pen test, it really is going to depend on the scope. Unfortunately, obviously, with pen tests, this is out of scope, that's out of scope. And then obviously there's the whole bug bounty discussions as well. So, yeah, I mean, I just really wanted to hear what everyone's thoughts were, really, more than anything.
Well, what I would suggest is the ASVS is designed to be forked. There is actually a JSON version and a CSV version. What I did at my previous firm was I actually created a pen test list based off the ASVS levels 1 and 2 and trimmed off the things I didn't think were so important. I encourage that. The other one I would recommend people look into is the Security Knowledge Framework by Ten Kate and his brother. That is an amazing tool. You can actually import your test cases into that and help developers come up with solutions. So do look into SKF. I think it's a really important tool that's way underutilized and not as well known as it should be.
I'd like to. Looks like Lydia needs to leave in a short moment. Before that, thank you, Lydia, for jumping on board and asking so many awesome questions. Really appreciate it. Do we have more questions? Lydia, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a good,
Bye, Lydia.
happy holidays. Oops. Sorry. Clicking too many buttons at the same time. Did we fantastic conversations we have had so far. Toni, were you going to ask a question? Thought I accidentally interrupted you. Sorry.
No, you just kicked me out and brought me back in again. That's fine. There's a few new things out there that I haven't had the chance to read yet, but I'm interested in. And so Tanya Junka's got her new book, Alice and Bob Learn Application Security. There's the Pen Tester's Blueprint. There's definitely heaps of new content still coming out. I know Laura Bell and Erica Anderson are putting out a new book soon. I'm stoked to be a part of this and to really just keep the education going and get more involved again. More developers, getting back into code, loving it. I get to go to my Python roots and have fun.
Yeah, it is the holiday season, so like many picking up projects here.
I just realized who Greybeard was, and John and I have talked many times. I absolutely do need to make sure that John and the education committee are well supported. So anything that anyone can volunteer to help John and the team get that curriculum moving forward, I'd love to see that happen.
Yeah. Just to add to that, like, it's been challenging, really, working with local universities, trying to identify what goes into an AppSec program and how, if people are interested in it as a career, like, where do you go? It's great. It's fantastic to see university groups like the Deakin Information Security Society, the RMIT Information Security Society, and a few others, MONSAC, and many more, which I'm pretty sure I could list, but it'll be a very long list. It's great. The talks are great. There is some awareness growing, and I'm hoping that that would start getting the universities to notice that, hey, it's not just InfoSec, but there is also AppSec, and developers testing is going to become more important to the quality of our software as the world increasingly runs on software. Is there any final questions before I wrap this up? No?
There's maybe just one quick one. I'm not sure how well this question will stick, but just on the topic, so at work we're trying to focus a lot more on the automation of security testing, obviously in the pipelines, smaller tests, more frequent tests, and there's a lot of really awesome tools. Some of them you mentioned, Andrew. But do you know of any like sort of larger projects or initiatives that try and sort of standardize or bring some of these practices together?
I'd really like to see the ASVS have a reference version of itself as GitHub Actions. There is no such project at the moment. I would reach out to Simon Bennett and Rick Mitchell, who's the Zappo authors, and see what they know of, because they'd be familiar. It's one of the strongest API testing tools in the industry, and it's free. Burp Suite has an API testing capability, but I think Zap is like way ahead of it. I mean, Mozilla built it to test their own APIs. So if anyone knows, Simon and Rick would probably know.
Awesome. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for that. Okay, so no other questions? Just taking a look at chat. I see someone's typing. Waiting
Happy
for
holidays.
that. Yeah. While we wait for the last questions, happy holidays. And thank you everyone for being here with us in 2020. Think of a year. Go celebrate. Get on with the peers. And yeah, thank you everyone. See you in 2021.
No worries. Catch you later. Thank you.
Thanks, Toni. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks,
Bye.
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 Thanks, Andrew.
No worries.